A lot of people hit 60, look up the average retirement savings number, compare it to their own, and immediately decide they're either doomed or doing fine. That is how a person turns retirement planning into a blood pressure test. Because one average number can scare the wrong people and calm down the wrong people at the exact same time. That is not a benchmark. That is a bad guess dressed up like advice. Here's the real problem. At 60, most people are not panicking because they have the wrong number. They're panicking because they're using the wrong yardstick. Maybe you've got $300,000 saved and some headline tells you that's a disaster. Maybe you've got $700,000 and some chart tells you to relax and buy a beach hat. In both cases, the benchmark may be lying to you because a retirement savings number by itself tells you almost nothing. It only starts to matter when you tie it to 4 things. What you actually spend, whether you're single or part of a couple, when Social Security shows up, and how much of your wealth can really be used to produce income. That's the real problem. The number is not the plan, and this is where a lot of retirement advice starts falling apart. First, average numbers are slippery. When people hear the average 60-year-old has this much saved, they treat it like gospel. It isn't. Average numbers get pushed around by high earners. They get pushed around by dual-income households, and they get pushed around by people with much bigger balances than the middle of the pack. That's why median numbers usually tell a cleaner story. But even then, you still have a problem. The so-called average 60-year-old is not a real person. That average might include a married couple with 2 Social Security checks, a paid-off house, and a pension. It might also sit next to a single renter with 1 income stream and higher monthly costs. Those are not the same retirement, not even close. That's like averaging a 10-wheeler truck and a scooter and calling it useful. Now let's make this useful. Take 2 people, both around 60, both with $500,000 saved. Same number, completely different pressure on the money. But person 1 is single, still renting, plans to claim Social Security early, and spends $4,500 a month. Person 2 is married, the house is mostly paid off, both spouses will get Social Security, and they can live just fine on $5,000 a month combined. Same savings, very different retirement. Point is, retirement is not funded by bragging rights. It is funded by income. How much has to come in, how steady it is, and how much pressure lands on the portfolio. That's what matters. A lot of people are using a pile of money test for what is really an income problem, and that's where good intentions go to die. Now here's the other benchmark trick that causes trouble. People mix up net worth and retirement savings as if they're the same thing. They are not. If somebody says their household net worth is $600,000, that could include home equity. It could include cash. It could include retirement accounts, a brokerage account, and maybe an old truck they swear is an investment. That is not the same as having $600,000 in investable retirement assets. Home equity can matter. Of course it can. But unless there's a plan to use it, your home equity does not pay the electric bill. A house can help. It can be downsized, sold, or used to cut costs. But if a benchmark pretends all wealth is equally spendable, that benchmark is nonsense. Now here's where this gets expensive. The same retirement balance can work beautifully or poorly, depending on the gap between spending and reliable income. That gap is the whole game. Let's say somebody has $500,000 saved. If they need $6,000 a month and they've got 1 modest Social Security check coming, that portfolio is under real pressure. Now take that same $500,000. If spending is lower, the house is paid off, and there's a pension or a second Social Security check, the pressure is much lower. Same balance, different strain, different outcome. That's why, how do I compare, is usually the wrong question. The better question is, how hard does my money have to work? That is a much less glamorous question. It is also the one that pays the bills. And this is where the famous $1 million benchmark starts making a mess. $1 million became the retirement trophy because people love round numbers. Round numbers feel official. So do a lot of dumb rules. That doesn't make them useful. For some households, $1 million may not be enough. For others, it may be far more than they ever need. It depends on spending. It depends on housing, health, and timing. And it depends on taxes and what other income shows up. Same thing with salary multiple rules. They can be useful as rough guideposts. But the moment people start treating them like a moral report card, they become trouble. If somebody says, by 60 I should have 8 times salary, that may sound helpful. But what if their spending is modest? They'll get decent Social Security, and the house is paid off. What if they earned a high income for years, but won't need anything close to that lifestyle in retirement? That's when the benchmark starts creating panic the facts do not support. The reverse mistake is just as bad. Somebody can look above average and still be in shaky shape. Maybe they've got a large account balance, but spending is high, debt is still hanging around, and they haven't thought much about withdrawals, income timing, or what retirement will actually cost. That person may look terrific in a headline and still have a weak plan. So the benchmark fails in both directions. It can make a decent situation look bad, and it can make a risky situation look fine. That is not a small error. That gets expensive. It's because bad benchmarks lead to bad behavior. They make people work longer than they may need to. They make people take too much investment risk trying to catch up in a hurry. They make people chase returns when what they really need is cost control and a cleaner income plan. Or they do the opposite. They make people feel safe because their number looks good, while the actual retirement plan is still shaky. The thing is, neither one is ideal. Confidence is lovely. However, it is not an income strategy. Now, I'm not saying benchmarks are useless. At 60, the timeline is shorter. Mistakes cost more. Vague advice gets expensive fast. This is where I'd stop asking, how do I compare? And I'd start asking 6 better questions. First, what do I actually need to spend each month for a realistic retirement? Not fantasy retirement, not brochure retirement, my actual realistic one. Second, what income is likely to show up no matter what? That could be Social Security, a pension, part-time work, rental income, anything that is actually dependable. Third, when does that income start? That matters a lot, especially with Social Security, and this is one of those areas where personal details really matter. Fourth, how much of my wealth is truly investable and usable for retirement income? Not flattering on paper. Usable. Fifth, what gap is left between my spending and my reliable income? That gap tells me how hard the portfolio has to work. And sixth, what can still be adjusted in the next 5 to 10 years? Spending, retirement date, housing, part-time income, debt cleanup, and claiming strategy. That is where money discipline comes into important play. And that is the real payoff. At 60, retirement readiness is not about whether your number beats an average. It is about whether your money, your income sources, and your spending can support the life you actually plan to live. That's the test. Everything else is mostly noise dressed up like guidance. Here's the line worth remembering. A retirement benchmark is useless if it measures your ego better than it measures your income. That's the trap. So if I were looking at retirement savings around 60, I would not start by asking whether my number is impressive. I'd start by asking whether it is attached to a plan. That's because a smaller number with a clean plan can beat a bigger number with a messy one every day of the week. The goal is not to win a comparison contest with strangers on the internet. The goal is to build a retirement that works in your real life. If this helped you stop judging retirement with a bad benchmark, please subscribe. I have more of these little money talks, and they're a lot cheaper than learning this lesson the hard way in your early 60s.